All right, thank you. So, this is a little bit about what we're going to be talking about, establishing principles and tenets so that we can move fast, creating frameworks and alignment for decision making. And I'm excited to talk about this. So I will more properly introduce myself now. I kind of did a little bit earlier, but I am a senior product manager currently at OpenSpace and do some consulting. So OpenSpace is a technology construction company. We actually do a lot of AI, which we were just talking about at this table here. And also, ironically, do some consulting primarily in some of the NFT and Web3 space right now. Also do a lot of writing, and you can find some of that. Do a podcast, which is Product by Design, and a newsletter, Product Thinking, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So you can find out all about that if you're interested. And you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and would love to connect with everybody here. So message or tweet at me or whatever. And let's jump into it. So start out with a story, building the Macintosh. Is anybody familiar with kind of the early days of Apple, building the Macintosh? Yeah, all right. So I'm going to pull some quotes. So I've got my iPad up so I can quote from a little bit from the book Steve Jobs, which is a great book, but I'll highlight a little bit of the history of the early days of Apple. So it started out Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, obviously. The Apple I, which great device there. Not many in existence anymore, but they hand-built by Steve Wozniak. And then moved quickly into the Apple II, which they prototyped in 1976 and then launched in 1977. And from there, went from selling about 2,000 units to about 200,000 over the next couple years. And then moved into the Apple III. So Apple II was a great success. Apple III kind of flopped. And so Apple was looking for a successor to that. And what they were looking at was first the Lisa, which was going to have a graphical user interface. And Steve Jobs was super pumped about this. And he got really heavily involved in the Lisa project and was really starting to manage it on a day-to-day basis until the other managers and people at Apple basically kicked him off the project and told him he could not be involved anymore. And that's when he kind of took over the Macintosh project, which was originally kind of a skunkworks project that was happening on the side. And he took over the day-to-day management of that project. And as he did that, he started to come up with some ideas or things that he would tell the team on the Macintosh project frequently, some ideas that he would emphasize to them. And these were things like simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So he was constantly talking about these ideas to the Macintosh team. Intuitively obvious. He wanted to make the Macintosh something that was so easy to understand. He used this idea of the desktop as a metaphor. A literal desktop, like when you walk into an office, there is a desktop with papers on it, something that everybody could understand. And that's the idea that he was using. As beautiful as possible, even if it's inside the box. A lot of us might be familiar with this. But I just want to quote this because I love it. I do woodworking as well. But he said, when you're a carpenter making a beautiful chest of drawers, you're not going to use a piece of plywood on the back, even though it faces the wall and nobody will ever see it. You know it's there, so you're going to use a beautiful piece of wood on the back. For you to sleep well at night, the aesthetic, the quality has to be carried all the way through. So he wanted the computer to be beautiful, even on the inside, even if nobody would see it. And he would tell the team that. Each detail is essential, even the packaging. And he forced the team to redo the packaging like 50 times until it was right. Don't compromise. He would tell his team constantly, we're not going to compromise. And it's better to miss than turn out the wrong thing. He had a $5,000 bet that the Macintosh would come out before the Lisa. Does anyone know which one came out first? Any guesses? It wasn't the Macintosh. It was the Lisa. It came out first. He lost the bet. He had to pay $5,000, which was a hefty sum, but Steve Jobs was rich. So, and better to be a pirate than join the Navy. I love this one because he would constantly tell his team that it's better to be a pirate than join the Navy. This was like the ethos of the Macintosh team, that they wanted to kind of cut against the grain. They wanted to be rebels. They wanted this idea of, we can do things, we can steal from other people, we can get things done, and we can do it fast. So the idea behind this is that Steve Jobs was really trying to instill these ideas, or I like to think of them as principles, into the team so that they could make decisions, so that they could have these ideas front and center all throughout the Macintosh project and use them to guide all of the decisions that they were making. So what are principles, and why do we care? Principles for me are foundational values, fundamental truths, codes of conduct, or the scales that we use to weigh decisions one way or another. So the idea that we can take these concepts, these maxims, these quotes, and use them to weigh a decision against another decision. So let's take another example here. The Pirates Code. We were just talking about let's be pirates rather than join the Navy. So who's familiar with Pirates of the Caribbean? Okay, a lot of us. All right, in the movie they have the Pirates Code. It's kind of fundamental to the beginning of the movie. And they talk about it through the whole series. I haven't watched all the movies, but I was able to pull some of these from the interwebs. The idea of parlay, the idea that any man who falls behind is left behind, the idea that a war can be declared by the pirate king, that you have to serve on the ship or be put to death, an equal share of the treasure. So these are all part of the pirate code. And we know that parlay is one of the first things that happens in the movie. So Elizabeth Swann calls for parlay, and that means that she has to be taken to the captain before anything can happen to her. And they honor that. They take her to Captain Barbosa, and she's able to talk with him. The idea behind the code, though, is that it makes it easy for them to make decisions. So rather than have to decide what do we do with a prisoner who has asked for parlay, they know that they need to take her to the captain, and they can just do that. And, oh yeah, pistol with the bullet as well. Any man who falls behind is left behind. That sounds like a terrible, terrible thing to do to somebody, but it also makes the decision-making process easy. Like if somebody falls behind, we don't have to, as a group of pirates, we don't have to decide like, what are we going to do now that John has fallen behind. We know that we're going to leave him behind. It's part of the code. So sorry, John, like we're leaving you behind. All right. And we know that the code is really more guidelines than actual rules. So generally, we're going to follow that, and it's going to help our decision-making process. But why? So why do we care about that? Because ultimately, this creates a shared framework for us, for our decision-making process, so that ultimately we can scale the magic. As our teams grow, and as we become larger within our organizations, these decisions become much more difficult, and it becomes much harder for everybody to get together and make constant decisions. And so being able to have a set of principles that we can use in order to make those decisions and help us not only scale, but continue to move faster. So this is kind of a simplified idea that I kind of use. A lot of us are probably familiar with the idea of having a vision and a strategy and then executing on that. And if we have the idea of a vision, setting up top, and then our strategy that's kind of guiding us towards that, and then our execution, our principles really live in that layer between our execution and our strategy. They allow us to make decisions that are going to guide our strategy towards our ultimate vision, and help us, again, constantly be driving towards the ultimate vision that we have within our product. So let me use another example here. This is Mount Everest, and if we're going to apply like that vision and strategy and execution model. So Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet. Does anybody have the goal to climb Mount Everest? I've always interested. Yeah? Or has anybody done it? No, not yet. But wait, you've done it? Not to the top, but you've been to Mount Everest. Wow. Anybody else been to Mount Everest? Okay, that's awesome. All right. So how far up have you been? 22,000 feet? Wow, okay. So that's crazy. All right, so Mount Everest is 29,000 feet, so you've been a good way up. And interestingly, and I didn't know this, but there are 20 different routes to the top of Mount Everest that have been done. There are probably some other ones that haven't been done, but 20 different routes on 3 different faces. So there's the north face, the east face, and the southwest face. And the north face has 10 different routes. The east face has 4, and the southwest face has 6. So if we have this idea of our vision is to get to the top of Mount Everest, that's what we want to do. And now we can take any of those different ways to get there. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways we can get to the top of Mount Everest. And we decide our strategy now is we're going to take the Northwest Ridge route. So vision is reach the summit. Our strategy is the Northeast Ridge route, not the Northwest Ridge route. Now, in order to do that, in order to make sure that we stay alive while we're doing that, we may want to establish some principles so that while we're on the mountain, we don't have to constantly be deciding as a group, what is it that we're going to do when we get there? Like we want to have some principles to help guide our decision-making process while we're on there. And some of those might be, the Sherpa's word is final. Whatever our guides say while we're on the mountain, that is final. That it's 100% or nothing. We have to be up to it or we don't go. And maybe we're pirates now, and if you fall behind, you're left behind. So sorry again, John. You fall behind on Mount Everest, we leave you behind. We did this, I did this presentation, and that was actually one I added in after because we had this discussion on what should some of our principles be, and somebody mentioned that. And so it got added in, and now that's one of our principles for Mount Everest is you fall behind, you're left behind. So I'm sorry. But it's good to know because, maybe as a group we decide that we want, no man left behind or no woman left behind or no person left behind. And so we have that as our principle. But that way we know what our principles are going to be. So we don't have to make that decision every time something happens on the mountain. All right, so let's take a look at some examples. I think these are important of other companies. And then we'll dive into how we can do this ourselves. So Slack. These are some of the principles some product principles that they have. So don't make me think. Be a great host. Prototype the path. Don't reinvent the wheel. Make bigger, bolder bets. I think that these are really great because they help, one, guide Slack's product decisions, but they also highlight some of the trade-offs. So for example, don't make me think. They highlight in their discussion of this, and I'll just quote from there, it means that all our efforts should serve to ensure that using Slack feels effortless, giving users more time to focus on work that matters. So each of these can help with some of the trade-offs and decisions that Slack has to make as they implement some of their product decisions. We'll do another one here. Box. Does anyone use Box? We all probably use Slack. Does anybody not use Slack? You don't use Slack, okay. Your company doesn't use Slack. I had a company that didn't use Slack, but does anyone use Box? This is probably a less common one. Okay. Cloud file storage. So some of their principles or tenets: protect customer data, make content infinitely better, be insanely simple, build horizontal software for the masses, focus on network effects, and think 10x and partner deeply. I love these because they specifically call out some of the trade-offs. So things like build horizontal rather than specialized software. Focus on network rather than enterprise, and think 10x rather than quick iterations. That's something that some of us might not do. We may come up for our teams or our product organizations, focus on quick iterations rather than think 10x. And that would be totally fine. But at Box, they have called out a principle specifically for thinking 10x rather than quick iterations. And so they have made that conscious decision. And now whenever they come into conflict, a decision comes into conflict, they've already made it. And now their teams can say, that's part of our principles, and we know what we're going to do. So another example here, pay.com. 3 principles. We are not a bank. Sense of security and privacy is key. And merchants are the gateway to customers, so our product must wow the merchant. They used a really great example in describing their principles. A sense of security and privacy is key. So most of us, when we are optimizing our products, how many of us try to minimize the clicks that customers take? I know that's something we do constantly. They ran into the same thing, minimize the clicks, but it was going to come at the cost of security. So they were looking at, do we put the CVC code on the digital card? And if they had that hidden, it would be an extra click. And so they were debating that constantly. And they went to their principles and said, okay, sense of security and privacy is key. And so that made the decision simple. It was going to cost an extra click, but they were going to prioritize the sense of security and privacy. And so having these principles in place allowed them to make an easier decision without having to have those constant debates about, should we do this, should we not? All right, so how can we put this into practice? This, for me, is something that we did recently on our team. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through the application of what we did and how we're actually working through it. So we went through and basically put all of our decisions and tensions that we've looked at recently. And being product people, who can guess what we used to write all those out? Those are whiteboard, Lisa, those are good guesses. Sticky notes, yeah, we got a whole bunch of sticky notes and wrote them all out. All of the decisions that we'd made and the tension. So things like web versus mobile, flexible versus strict, and all of those things. And we put them up on a board and tried to group them together. So all of the things that, again, the decision points and the tensions that we've seen in our product, to try and make sense of, what are the decisions that we're trying to make on a regular basis, or that we have made in the past. And from there, we put them into a continuum. So we grouped them all together into what we considered similar things. And then we did about 14 of these, where we put opposing ideas up, and then we voted on them. So things like flexible versus prescriptive, play well with others versus walled garden. And then we all took the time to put dots on to decide, where do we think our principles should be, and where we value our product more. Should it be more flexible or more prescriptive? Should it play well with others, or should it be more of a walled garden? And after we did that with about, again, 14 of these, that helped us decide, or started the discussion of, what are our principles and where do we sit right now? Like where are the biggest tensions? It was interesting, like some of these were very much scattered and some of them were very much aligned to one side or the other. But that allowed us to kind of start to put together what should be some principles and start to workshop, less but better and get it out there and one solution to rule them all and let the product do the work and things like that. With some additional context around it so that we could say, we value, and I'll read just a little bit. We value simplicity over robustness, and we prioritize the experience of new users over power users, and things like that to clarify where we stand as far as our product goes and things that we're going to focus on, so that when decisions come up and when we have to make some of those difficult choices, we know from our product and design organization where we can make some of those choices and where we should fall on those continuums. So that is how we have started that process and where we're constantly revisiting. And so this is something that we've been revisiting every few weeks for the last little while. And as we've done this at other places as well, establishing product principles and tenets, it's kind of an ongoing process to ensure that the product values and the product principles that you create, you're able to make sure that they're continually aligned with the decisions that you're making and that they're doing their job for you and that everybody understands them, and that as your company changes or your product changes, if you need to make adjustments, they can be flexible as well, and that you can make those adjustments as you go. So, principles. Ultimately, the goal is to give you and your teams more autonomy, allow you to scale, and give you a framework for decision making so that you can continue to evolve, your product can continue to evolve, and the principles themselves can continue to evolve as you grow, and that you can make the magic. So that is all. Thank you, everybody. All right. And we've got a few minutes, so we will do any questions if anybody has them. And we'll stand in awkward silence for a second. All right, what would be my number one tip for a new PM? That's got so many number one tips for new PMs. I would say one thing that I love to do and I think is great for new PMs and younger PMs is to take other products and really just like dissect them. So like tear down or dissect products and just think hard about them. I love to do that myself, like whether it's informally or formally, and really just go through the process of like, what are the PMs of this product thinking? And what are they thinking? And it really kind of puts you in the mindset of a product manager. And what are they focused on? What trade-offs are they making? Like what's really great about it? What's not great about it, and what would you do differently? How is it generating revenue? That sort of thing. And I think it's something that almost comes naturally after you've been a PM for a while. Like I find myself just doing it with apps or doing with other things. And so just kind of putting yourself in that mindset constantly as a new PM will, I think, make you a better PM over the long run. So just really thinking hard about that early on. That's probably one thing that I would say. Let's see. How often does your team reference or consult the principles during decision making? We did this a little while ago on another team at another company, and we would do it every roadmap meeting. So we would pull up our principles and consult them, and that would be once a month. Right now, we've been consulting them frequently. So every couple of weeks, like we will pull them up as a product organization, product team, and talk about them. And we're trying to pull examples of how we're using them and how they're working and how they're not, because they're relatively new to us as an organization. I expect that we'll probably fall into a cadence of, probably more like once a month or something like that. But it's been, that's how we've been approaching it for right now. And I think that feels good to me, just once a month-ish and figuring it out from there. But yeah. The craziest yet most effective principle you have applied. Oh man. That is, let me come back to that one in a second. How do you factor your principles into your roadmap and prioritization? Is it just ensuring a fit, or do principles become your core drivers? They tend to be, for us, and in my experience, a lot of the decision-making process, especially when things come into conflict. So how we make trade-offs and where we're going to focus. We value things like, we value speed over, getting something 100%. And so that may not always come into play. But the idea that, hey, we have a principle about getting something out quickly as opposed to getting it 100% right. And so that is something that comes into effect relatively frequently. And other people in other industries or in other teams, may feel like they need to get something more fully baked as opposed to getting out quickly. And that's 100% valid and right, given the right context. And so just making sure that everybody understands that and is on the same page. So that's kind of how we approach it. What stakeholders were involved with the exercise of creating the principles? So our product team, UX, our data science, and then we've been working with our chief product / technology and our CEO as well. And then our VP of marketing. So from a couple other organizations, just to make sure everybody's aware of how we're approaching it. And then in previous roles, it's been somewhat similar. So CMO, CIO, CTO, just depending on who, I guess, cares the most. But that's kind of how we've approached it this time. Awesome. Let's see. Craziest yet most effective principle you've applied. I don't know if I have a good answer to that. So I'm going to have to think about that a little bit, and I'll come up with a good answer. So I'll defer on that one for a little bit. But let's see. Okay, I think that's it for now. And thank you again, everybody.